How many people know that the world's most famous blonde was actually a brunette? That Hollywood's dumb blonde had an IQ estimated at 168 and owned over 400 books? That the sex symbol of the 1950s was secretly terrified of sex? That she created her own production company at a time when no woman in Hollywood had that kind of power? Welcome back to American Biographies. Today, we're diving deep into the life of Marilyn Monroe, a woman whose image is instantly recognizable worldwide, but whose real story has been buried beneath decades of myth, male fantasy, and Hollywood manipulation. This isn't the simplified version you've seen in movies about her. This is the real Marilyn Monroe, the foster child who became the biggest star in the world, the ambitious businesswoman who fought the studio system, the tragic figure who struggled with mental illness and addiction, and the complex woman who was so much more. Her life lasted only 36 years, from 1926 to 1962. But in that time, she became immortal. Yet the woman herself, Norma Jean Baker, remained a mystery even to those who thought they knew her best. So let's separate the myth from the reality and explore the extraordinary, heartbreaking, and ultimately triumphant story of Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe was born Norma Jean Mortensen on June 1st, 1926, in Los Angeles. But even her birth name is shrouded in mystery. Her birth certificate listed her father as Martin Edward Mortensen, but her mother, Gladys Pearl Baker, was separated from Mortensen and likely hadn't seen him in months. Gladys later pointed to a photograph of a man named Charles Stanley Gifford, saying he was Norma Jean's real father. Gifford worked at the film lab where Gladys worked. He never acknowledged the child. Here's the heartbreaking part. Gladys couldn't care for Norma Jean. She was a single mother in the 1920s, working long hours at the film studios, and she was beginning to show signs of the mental illness that would plague her entire life. Gladys's own parents had been committed to mental institutions, and she lived in terror of the same fate. So baby Norma Jean was placed with foster parents, Albert and Ida Bolender, devout Christians who took in foster children. For the first 7 years of her life, Norma Jean believed the Bolenders were her parents. Gladys would visit on weekends, but Norma Jean called her the lady with the red hair. Here's an unusual fact that shows how this affected her. Decades later, as Marilyn Monroe, she would compulsively seek out older mother figures, surrounding herself with acting coaches, therapists, and mentors, desperately seeking the maternal love she never had. In 1933, when Norma Jean was 7, Gladys tried to take her back and create a real home. They moved into a house together. Norma Jean was ecstatic. Finally, she had her mother. But it lasted only months. Gladys had a severe mental breakdown and was institutionalized. She would spend most of the rest of her life in and out of mental. What happened to 7-year-old Norma Jean? She became a ward of the state. Over the next several years, she lived in 11 different foster homes and spent time in an orphanage. She later described feeling like she didn't belong anywhere, that she was always on the outside looking in. In one foster home, she was sexually assaulted by a boarder when she was 8 years old. When she told her foster mother, the woman slapped her and told her not to make up wicked stories. In another home, she was forced to do most of the housework. The trauma of these years would haunt Monroe for the rest of her life. She found escape in 2 places: the movies and her imagination. She would go to the cinema and lose herself in the glamorous world on screen. She later said, "I used to think as I looked out on the Hollywood night, there must be thousands of girls sitting alone like me, dreaming of becoming a movie star. But I'm not going to worry about them. I'm dreaming the hardest." At age 16, to avoid being sent back to an orphanage, Norma Jean married her neighbor's son, James Doherty. He was 21. She wore a borrowed dress. It was 1942, and within a year, Doherty joined the Merchant Marines and shipped out. Norma Jean got a job at a defense plant, inspecting parachutes and assembling planes. This is where the transformation began. In 1944, a photographer named David Conover was sent to the defense plant to take pictures of women contributing to the war effort. He spotted Norma Jean. Even in overalls with no makeup, there was something about her. The camera loved her. Conover asked her to model. She was terrified, but agreed. Those photographs launched her modeling career. Within months, Norma Jean was on magazine covers. She bleached her brunette hair blonde. Her natural hair was actually a light brown, not dark brunette as often claimed. She learned how to pose, how to move, how to create the illusion of effortless sensuality. Marilyn Monroe invented her signature breathy voice and walk. Her normal speaking voice was lower and more serious, but she studied how to make herself seem simultaneously sexy and innocent. The walk, the voice, the half-closed eyes. She constructed Marilyn Monroe piece by piece. By 1946, she had divorced Doherty. He later said she loved her career more than him. He was probably right. And signed a contract with 20th Century Fox. The studio changed her name. They suggested Marilyn after Broadway star Marilyn Miller, and she chose Monroe after her mother's maiden name. Norma Jean Baker became Marilyn Monroe. But success didn't come immediately. Fox dropped her contract after a year. Columbia Pictures signed her, then dropped her. For 5 years, she struggled, taking bit parts, doing countless screen tests, and, by her own later admission, sleeping with powerful men to get roles. She posed nude for a calendar to pay her rent, photos that would later nearly destroy her career. In 1950, she landed a small but memorable role in The Asphalt Jungle and got noticed. Then came All About Eve, where she had only a few scenes but was luminous on screen. Johnny Hyde, a powerful agent who fell in love with her, fought to get her noticed. He died of a heart attack in 1950, and Monroe was devastated. He had believed in her when no one else did. But the studio finally saw her potential. They re-signed her, and the publicity machine began. Monroe was marketed as the ultimate sex symbol. Blonde, curvy, available. Magazine covers, pin-up photos, headlines about her measurements. The studio built the fantasy, and Monroe played along because she wanted stardom desperately. Here's what people missed. She was smart about it. She understood exactly what they were doing and made conscious choices about how to play the game. She once said, "I want to be a big star more than anything. It's something." By 1953, Marilyn Monroe was a phenomenon. Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, where she sang "Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend," made her a superstar. How to Marry a Millionaire cemented her status. She was the most photographed woman in the world. But behind the scenes, Monroe was miserable. 20th Century Fox paid her $1,500 per week while she made them millions. They cast her in film after film as the dumb blonde, roles that required her to play vapid, giggly, one-dimensional characters. She later said, "I want to grow and develop and play serious, dramatic roles. I'm not going to be a glamorous actress. I want to be an actress with glamour." But the studio didn't care what she wanted. To them, she was a product, a commodity. Studio head Daryl F. Zanuck allegedly said she was a vacuum, a complete nothing, except as a sex symbol. Here's an unusual fact that shows Monroe's intelligence. She was reading constantly. On movie sets, while other stars socialized, Monroe sat alone reading Dostoevsky, Freud, Joyce, Whitman. She underlined passages and wrote notes in the margins. She took courses at UCLA. She kept a diary where she wrote surprisingly sophisticated observations about art, literature, and philosophy. But the public only saw the blonde bombshell. The pressure was crushing. Monroe began suffering from chronic insomnia, anxiety, and depression. She started taking sleeping pills, barbiturates that were prescribed freely in those days. She would rely on them for the rest of her life, taking more and more as her tolerance built. She was also chronically late to set, sometimes by hours. Directors and co-stars found her difficult, unreliable. But here's the thing. Monroe was terrified. Despite her success, she suffered from severe performance anxiety and had an almost pathological fear of disappointing people. The lateness wasn't arrogance, it was paralysis. She would stand outside the soundstage, unable to walk in, needing someone to physically lead her to the set. Director Billy Wilder, who worked with her multiple times, said, "She has a certain indefinable magic that comes across, which no one else has. But working with her was like working with someone who's underwater. You'd have to pull her up to get her to do anything." In 1954, Monroe married baseball legend Joe DiMaggio. Here was America's ultimate fantasy, the sex symbol and the sports hero. Their wedding was front-page news. The marriage lasted 9 months. DiMaggio was traditional, jealous, and wanted a housewife. Monroe wanted a career. When they went to Japan for their honeymoon, thousands of fans mobbed her. DiMaggio stood in the background, forgotten. He resented it. The final straw came during the filming of The 7-Year Itch. That famous scene, Monroe standing over a subway grate, her white dress blowing up, was filmed on a New York street with thousands of gawking spectators. DiMaggio was there, watching men ogle his wife, and he was furious. They had a violent fight that night. Within weeks, Monroe filed for divorce. But the 7-Year Itch made Monroe the most famous woman on earth. That image of her dress billowing became the most iconic photograph of the 20th century. And then Monroe did something remarkable. She rebelled. In 1954, she walked out on her Fox contract. She moved to New York and started her own production company, Marilyn Monroe Productions, with photographer Milton Green. At a time when no actresses, and very few men, had that kind of power, Monroe demanded control over her films, her roles, and her image. The studio executives were shocked. How dare this dumb blonde defy them? They suspended her without pay, thinking she'd come crawling back. She didn't. Instead, Monroe enrolled in the Actors Studio in New York, studying method acting under Lee Strasberg. She studied with some of the most serious actors of her generation. Strasberg believed she had genuine talent, calling her one of the 2 or 3 greatest actresses he'd ever worked with. Here's a quote from Monroe about this period. "I'm trying to find myself as a person. Sometimes that's not easy to do. Millions of people live their entire lives without finding themselves. But it is something I must do. The best way for me to find myself as a person is to prove to myself that I am an actress." After a year, Fox surrendered. They gave Monroe a new contract, $100,000 per film, approval over directors and scripts, and a commitment to let her do serious, dramatic roles. It was an unprecedented victory. In 1956, Monroe married playwright Arthur Miller, one of America's greatest intellectuals. If DiMaggio represented her need for protection, Miller represented her hunger for intellectual respectability. She converted to Judaism for him. She believed he saw her as more than a sex symbol. For a while, they were happy. Monroe made Bus Stop, a serious, dramatic role that earned her the best reviews of her career. Then came The Prince and the Showgirl with Laurence Olivier. Olivier, a classical actor, treated Monroe with contempt, but her performance was luminous. She proved she could hold her own against one of the greatest actors of all time. But Monroe's personal life was unraveling. She desperately wanted children, but suffered multiple miscarriages and ectopic pregnancies. Each loss devastated her. She blamed herself, worried that the abortions she'd had earlier in her career had damaged her ability to care. Her mental health deteriorated. The anxiety, depression, and insomnia worsened. She increased her pill intake, barbiturates to sleep, amphetamines to wake up. The cycle was destroying her. And then she discovered that Miller had written in his journal that he was disappointed in her, that she wasn't the person he thought she was. She read those words, and something broke inside her. If her brilliant husband saw her as a disappointment, maybe everyone else was right about her. The movie Some Like It Hot, 1959, became one of the greatest comedies ever made, and Monroe's performance was perfection. But filming was a nightmare. Director Billy Wilder said she couldn't remember her lines, needed dozens of takes for simple scenes. In one scene, she was supposed to look in drawers and say, "Where's the bourbon?" She couldn't remember the line, so they taped it inside each drawer. She still couldn't get it right. She'd open the drawer and say, "Where's the whiskey?" or "Where's the bottle?" But on screen, she was magic. Wilder later said, "Anyone can remember lines, but it takes a real artist to come up with, 'Where's that bourbon?' the way Marilyn did." Here's one of her most poignant quotes from this period. "I've been on a calendar, but never on time." She knew her own failures, could joke about them, but couldn't overcome. By 1961, Monroe's marriage to Miller was over. She finished filming The Misfits with Clark Gable, her idol, the man whose photograph she'd kept as a child in foster care. Gable died of a heart attack days after filming ended. Monroe blamed herself, convinced that her on-set difficulties had stressed him fatally. It wasn't true, but guilt consumed her. She was hospitalized multiple times for psychiatric care. She attempted suicide at least once, perhaps multiple times. Her pill dependency was out of control. And then there were the Kennedy brothers. Monroe met President John F. Kennedy and his brother Robert Kennedy. The nature of her relationships with them remains controversial. Some biographers claim affairs with both brothers. Others argue the evidence is circumstantial. What's certain is that Monroe was invited to JFK's 45th birthday celebration at Madison Square Garden in May 1962. She wore a dress so tight it had to be sewn onto her body. She was hours late. And then she sang "Happy Birthday, Mr. President" in the most seductive rendition of the song ever performed. JFK joked afterward, "I can now retire from politics after having had happy birthday sung to me in such a sweet, wholesome way." It was Monroe's last major public appearance. By summer 1962, she was being fired from her final film, Something's Got to Give, for chronic absences. The studio was going to sue her. Her phone calls to the Kennedys went unreturned. She'd become a liability. She was alone, broke, and spiraling. On August 4th, 1962, Monroe was found dead in her Brentwood home. The official cause was acute barbiturate poisoning, ruled a probable suicide. She was 36 years old. But questions have lingered for 6 decades. Was it suicide or an accidental overdose? Were the Kennedys involved? Why were there inconsistencies in the timeline? Why was her house cleaned before the police arrived? We'll probably never know the complete truth. What we do know is that Marilyn Monroe died alone in a house full of pills at the height of her fame and the depth of her So who was Marilyn Monroe, really? She was a brilliant businesswoman who fought the studio system and won. She was an actress with genuine talent who could hold the screen against anyone. She was a woman who fought her entire life against being dismissed as just a pretty face. She was also a deeply wounded person who never escaped her traumatic childhood. She was an addict who couldn't break free from her dependence on pills. She was someone who craved love, but seemed unable to trust it when she found it. But here's what's most important. Marilyn Monroe knew exactly who she was. She understood the difference between herself and the persona she created. She once said, "I don't mind living in a man's world as long as I can be a woman in it." And this one, imperfection is beauty, madness is genius, and it's better to be absolutely ridiculous than absolutely boring. And perhaps most tellingly, if I'd observed all the rules, I'd never have got any. Monroe understood that Marilyn Monroe was a character she played, perhaps her greatest role. But Norma Jean, the frightened foster child who dreamed of being loved and accepted, never quite believed she deserved the adoration Marilyn received. After her death, Monroe became even more famous. Her image appears on everything from posters to coffee mugs. Andy Warhol immortalized her in pop art. She became a symbol, an icon, a myth. Marilyn Monroe has been dead for over 60 years, but her image is more recognizable than ever. She's been portrayed in countless films, books, and plays. Everyone has an opinion about who she was. Marilyn Monroe's life fell apart, but what she left behind, the films, the photographs, the inspiration she gave to women who fought their own battles, that will never fall apart. She deserves to be remembered not as a tragic victim or a sex symbol, but as a woman who fought against the limitations placed on her, who dreamed bigger than anyone thought she should, and who proved that dumb blondes might be the smartest people in the room. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Marilyn Monroe's real story, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more untold stories from American history. Thanks for watching, and remember, We are all of us stars, and we deserve to twinkle.